Hello and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Welcome to this episode, and today I'm exploring the impact becoming a mother has on our careers with Sara Campin. And it's a topic that's close to my heart and really the purpose of why Wisdom for Working Mums was set up. How do we continue to fulfil our career ambitions and maintain our professional identity after having children without burning out? And Sarah's story is fascinating. And during this episode, she shares how her high-stress corporate career changed after becoming a mum, her experience of where her career and motherhood collided and the impact that this had on her, and how she eventually set up an amazing app called the Nourish app that helps mothers to find compassion, connection and calm. And in this episode, Sara shares how she felt huge pressure to go back to work quickly after having a firstborn, and how she struggled those first 6 to 12 months of motherhood with her first child, how she had anxiety and where sleep deprivation and the pressure of her corporate career had a real impact on her, and how she struggled to get the balance between her work and motherhood. And she really honestly shares how she didn't enjoy motherhood at this point in her life. She also talks about how after her second child, who had silent reflux, she suffered from stress and anxiety and reached out for support this time from her GP and was diagnosed with postnatal anxiety. And she really, again, honestly shares how she was pouring all of her energy into her career because that was her comfort zone, and actually how that left her with very little energy for her children. And it was really, after burning out, she went on a mission to find greater joy and balance, and how that led her to practice self-care. And she gives us some really powerful insights into what that actually means for her, and how that led her really on a journey with just the frustration as a time-poor working mum that there was a lack of easily accessible and practical resources that were tailored to the emotional challenges of mums. And that led her to create the Nourish app, which really is resources for us mums at our fingertips. I think you're really going to enjoy the honesty of how Sara shares her journey and what that's led her to create. So I'll just let you dive into this, and I hope you enjoy. So welcome, Sara. What I'd love for you to do is take us back to your life before children, kind of what you were doing, who you were, and kind of how life was for you.
Sure. So before kids, I had recently, about over a year before I had kids, I had moved from being a kind of external strategy consultant for the life sciences industry into an in-house strategic role, with the ambition of doing something a little bit more worthy than just making pharmaceutical companies lots of money. So I joined Cancer Research UK as head of research strategy, working closely with the executive team, strong, opinionated woman who was helping decide how the charity would invest their kind of £4 million in spend in cancer research. So really that kind of strong, independent woman in control, managing a team, all those perfectionist tendencies that we have when we're working hard, really putting all of my energy into my job and my career, and feeling kind of respected and successful, I guess. And obviously enjoying life in London, socialising, and I'd been married a year, and life was really good at that point.
So living the corporate dream almost, but I imagine still quite a high pressure environment to be working in.
Yeah, it definitely was. If anybody here has worked in the charitable sector, they'll know that actually, it's just the same kind of pressures for less pay. There's a huge expectation to work very hard, and it's not so much that expectation. I think it's that pressure that, you're coming from that corporate career with those skills, and experience under your belt that you can then apply to the charitable sector. So there's a lot of people who've come from corporate and focused on the charitable sector. So that expectation exists. It's definitely not an easy route through, but I think and almost more pressure. Well, not more pressure, but having built up that skill set in the corporate sector over kind of 13 years, to then apply those effectively in the charitable sector with actually not a lot of thanks for it and reward. But yes.
So then you obviously had your first child. So how did your career change, if at all, after your first child?
Yeah, so I think after my first, so I guess one of the things to say is, looking back, before I went on maternity leave with my first, there was kind of already a huge pressure to go back to work very quickly. And
where was that from? From your employer or from you?
It's hard to distinguish, and I think there was this expectation, and it's funny now, my daughter's turning 8 at the end of the month. But 8 years ago, I think there was more expectation to go back very quickly after work. I'm sure that still exists in a number of careers, but I remember having a conversation with my boss at the time, and he was like, "Oh, so do you think you'll come back after 4 months or 6 months?" And there was never a conversation that I would be gone for kind of 12 months or 13 months, which I know a lot of people take now. And also, we were, as I said, like there was a huge amount of pressure to work hard and deliver this really important role for the charity. And they struggled to find a maternity cover for me. And so there was I felt straight away this huge pressure that I was being expected to go back very quickly. And when I became, becoming a mum, I just remember thinking, oh my God, I cannot think about work at all. I just need to completely shut it off, which is obviously the best thing to do. But then feeling like, how can I possibly think about work? And I really struggled in that the first 6 to 12 months as a mum. And, I wasn't diagnosed with postnatal depression, but I'm pretty sure looking back that I did have mild postnatal depression, anxiety, and the sleep deprivation and everything. And on top of that, feeling that pressure that I needed to get back to work. And that was the expectation for me.
So how long did you take in the end?
So I ended up taking 8 months. I remember my boss at the time came to visit me at home when my daughter was about 5 months, and just feeling like, oh God, like he wants me to come back in a month's time and I'm going to have to let him down. And, and having that conversation and that huge pressure, and I pushed it back and eventually went back at 8 months. And I don't think I was ready. I don't think my daughter was ready. But I think, that's the reality when you're in quite a kind of important job. There is this expectation, and pressure that you will go back to it. But having said that, and I went back to work, and I went back 4 days a week, and I did have that extra day, but I then shifted from being so kind of focused on being a mother, struggling to be a mother, to being to thinking, oh, actually, I do love working. And focused all my attention and energy really back on my work. And I was working 4 days at the time, and I have to say I didn't love that 5th day with my daughter. And that's kind of hurts me to say that, but I found it really hard. And I know that was mainly because she was struggling with the, being absent from me for all that time. And then, only having that day, and there's that kind of payback, right?
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I was working I was working 4 days, but in a 5-day-a-week job. And therefore I was always thinking about work. I was really struggling to be present. I was much more tuned into my work than into her emotional needs. And so that, in hindsight, that was, I think, a lot of the struggle.
And I really appreciate your honesty, Sarah, because I think that so many people listening will be really able to relate to that. And I know I can, but the time that I was working when my son was little, I actually enjoyed more because there was that more sense of control and more sense of significance. My identity was clearer. And it's something that can feel a bit of a taboo to even admit that to, because it's not kind of culturally acceptable to kind of make those admissions. And I think that can mean that we sit with more kind of judgment around ourselves and therefore shame. So you being so open, I think, is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and hopefully people can resonate. And I think that, and I would love to say that I reflected on that earlier in my motherhood journey, but I think, things did improve, and I decided to get pregnant again, and, I knew I wanted two children, but I was still working incredibly hard. I was trekking across London, 4 days a week, with a massive pregnant belly. And I think put quite a lot of stress on my pregnancies. And reflecting on it, I'm like, maybe I just had really difficult babies because I was so stressed out during when I was working in both pregnancies. I was just working way too hard and producing so much cortisol that it then led to very difficult babies and colicky babies and things in those first few months of motherhood. And the second time round, I guess, as I said before, like first time round, I wasn't diagnosed with a mental health issue, but the second time round, I guess me and my husband were more reflective on some of the challenges we'd had first time round. And my son also had silent reflux. It was very difficult to feed. He was crying a lot of time. We had a lot of jealousy issues with my daughter. And because of my analytical brain, because of my perfectionism, I'm like analysing exactly what's wrong with him. I'm over analysing everything. And, I was definitely suffering with kind of stress and anxiety around that. So that time I did reach out for support and help from the GP, and was, diagnosed with mild anxiety, postnatal anxiety, put on a low dose of antidepressants, which I'm, very grateful for, because it allowed me to kind of lift out of the fog, and also did a group CBT course. But at the same time, and that was the first time I was introduced to this idea that I could challenge my thoughts, and some really great practical tools. But I was very frustrated by the kind of lack of tailored resources to the challenges that I was going through as a mum. It was very kind of generalized anxiety, and I was constantly having to relate. And it only went so far. It was a group course. It was, because I was on the mild end of the spectrum. But, at the same time, it did help me enjoy that first year of motherhood, with my second much more. But I have to admit, again, I ran back to work. I knew that I was struggling to be the mum that I wanted, to necessarily be, or struggling. I knew that I was in a happier place when I was working, because that was my comfort zone, and that feeling of control and things like that you talked about. And actually, second time round, I decided to hand in my notice at Cancer Research UK, and go back as an independent strategy consultant again for the pharmaceutical industry. And that was due to lots of reasons, like complicated reasons, due to the role that I was going back to, and the maternity cover and things like that. But I kind of ran back to work. So I went back after 9 months with my second, partly because I found mothering really hard. I hate to admit that I kind of ran away from my children. And again, I kind of ran into that, getting my first couple of projects, and I thought, this is great. And I'm walking down the street with my, my power suit and my latte, and, getting my life back into control and into my comfort zone. And it felt really great, I have to admit, especially in the short term. But then, all of those tendencies for perfectionism and doing a good job, working as a consultant, pouring all of my energy into my work, actually just left me with nothing left to give my kids as well. So it was after about 18 months that I kind of hit burnout. There was an awful Christmas when my son was, it was just after his, I think it was after his first birthday. Oh no, it must have been his second birthday. It was just after his second birthday. And my daughter had her first term at primary school, and just the whole, the house was just full of shouting and screaming and crying, and I was irritable and shouty, and I just woke up and thought, this is not the mother who I want to be. This is not the family life that I want my kids to have. There has to be a different way. And that was the really, me hitting crunch point of, burnout, and recognizing that I needed to start investing in myself and finding a different way forward.
Wow. And I think there's so many powerful things that you've said in that, Sarah. I think particularly the piece where you said, I hate that I found mothering so hard, and I can completely relate to that. And I think there is this unconscious expectation, and I don't know where it comes from, but that if we're good mothers, we would find it easy. And somehow if we're struggling, it's because we're failing. And I think that's such an important message that I know we both do with our work, is about kind of getting rid of that stigma that mothering is hard, and it's hard for a number of different reasons, and it's more hard for the modern mother in some ways than it's ever been. And sharing that experience of hitting that crunch point, because I from my own journey and from the women that I work with, it often takes that kind of hitting the brick wall, metaphorically, for us to take that step back and go, gosh, something has to change. Not sure what it is yet, but something has to, because this isn't the life that I kind of expected. And I think that's the powerful piece about what we're talking about here, about, motherhood on its own is hard. And being somebody that has a professional identity and is ambitious and wants that kind of reward from work can be hard. But when you combine the two, it's how do we do this in a way that doesn't burn us out? So what happened after that Christmas then? So you had this kind of realization that something's got to change. So what did you then do?
Yeah, so luckily I was coming towards the end of a project, so I so I decided to not take a project on in the short term, and that was the first time that I, and luckily I had a bit of money saved up from the work that I was doing, because I was, it was well paid work, and decided to work with a personal development coach. And that for me was, the turning point, the first investment that I made in myself, and really reflecting on what was really important to me. And the objective of that, that relationship with my coach was around finding, reigniting the passion in my work, because I knew, I wanted to work. I felt like I wanted to work. And I'd hit this, I still didn't kind of realize that was this, and I was feeling full of guilt and all of this stuff, but that was the main objective of finding work that I felt passionate about, or reigniting that passion. But through that, it kind of ignited this journey of self-care, and starting to take time for myself, and investigating things like mindfulness and yoga and other techniques. And I set off on that mission to find greater joy and balance, and through that, whilst as well looking at the kind of more work-related questions, it was actually the self-care journey that really transformed my motherhood journey, the relationship that I have with my kids, and my ability to find that more balance and joy in motherhood.
And I love that. And I think and I can very much relate to that with my journey. And it's interesting because sometimes when I hear other people talk about self-care, and particularly early on in my motherhood journey, it's kind of like, yeah, I know I should be doing that, but it could trigger a lot in me going, well, that's okay, you can do it because, and I would come up with these almost resistance to it. Either I haven't got time, or that's okay for you because, and would come up with reasons why other people could do it and I couldn't. So I think your journey is particularly powerful because you were so far removed from that before. So would you mind just sharing what you mean when you talk about what actually was self-care for you? What did you discover you needed to do, and how did you make that kind of possible?
Sure. Yeah. And I think self-care is so hard to define, and it does mean different things to different people. But, and when I look back, pre-kids, I was implementing self-care without even thinking about it. You have these strategies that you use, you're filling yourself. I was a really big runner. I did like a half triathlons and things like that, and I was very, everybody knew that I was a runner. And I used to run pretty much every day, definitely long runs at the weekends. And then obviously you're filling yourself up socially, meeting up with friends and all of these things. But then when you become a mother, a lot of those tools and techniques that you have for nourishing your mind and body fall by the wayside. And that's not to say that I didn't, I remember as a new mum, walking constantly, but you're so exhausted. Actually, some of those ways that you implement self-care pre-motherhood actually deplete you even more post-motherhood.
Completely agree, yeah.
And we really have to redefine what self-care looks like. And, and for me, self-care really is anything that nourishes your mind and body and soul. And that looks different in different moments, but I think it is really important that it's about refilling that tank, and that energetic bank balance. And some self-care activities like running, which are great for our mental health, but they can deplete us further. And even, a glass of wine can be an act of self-care, but a bottle of wine might not be. So it's all of these things. It's about finding that balance. But the things that have really been transformational for me is really, firstly, mindfulness. And as I said, I was introduced to this actually back pre-kids, starting to get into the kind of corporate world. a little bit, and I had heard about it, but I was like, oh, that's a bit too woo-woo for me. I just didn't really understand it. I've got a very busy brain, and very analytical mind, and it just didn't resonate with me. And it was actually taking that time to pause and reflect and read a little bit about mindfulness. And I did a 8-week course in mindfulness, having done some initial reading on it. But that for me has been transformational. Having a very busy brain, it means that, it's always on, and just bringing you into the present moment. And it just has so many benefits when we're overanalyzing, but also in finding those moments of connection with our children, with our husband. And it's those little moments where we find the joy in motherhood, because when our mind is constantly going, and often as working mothers, not only with our work going on in our heads, but all of the other mother load that we're carrying, we can miss out on all of those moments of joy that would otherwise keep us topped up.
So what does that look like for you now, Sarah? Do you have a regular practice? And if so, what does that look or feel like?
So that has changed over time, various points in the last few years. I do have a regular practice, but I also recognise how hard it is to carve out time. Self-care is really hard. Making time to sit still is really hard when you're a doer and constantly going. And so for me, to begin with, to get actually at the very beginning of my journey, it was some of the more active moments of my approaches to mindfulness. So some of the more being mindful in the moment. There are so many different ways you can do that, in the shower, or brushing your teeth, or while you're cooking or washing up. There's so many ways that you can just learn to bring yourself into the moment using your senses. And that was a great kind of transition for me. But then making time for those practices. And when I did the 8-week MBSR course, I just fell asleep in all the practices, I have to be honest.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I was like, this is just so unrealistic. I can't make 30 minutes in my day to sit down. But that's where it really doesn't need to be 30 minutes. Even just taking a couple of minutes in your day to pause and reset and bring your attention to your breath can really be transformational. And then building it up into those longer practices. And that's, so now, I tend to do a practice just before I go to bed, which might lead me to going to sleep. And then I tend to do something when I first wake up in the morning. And I'm now at the situation where my kids will wake up and they don't come straight into my bedroom. And so I might hear them downstairs, and I'll do like a 10-minute practice when I can, once I can hear they're awake. But that's not always possible. I recognize that, one of my biggest struggles was always my kids used to wake up screaming and shouting.
Yeah.
Way too early in the morning. So how could you possibly fit in a practice then? But back then, I'm not afraid to admit there were times where I, put Paw Patrol on and took 10 minutes to myself to make time for that practice, because I knew that I would be a better mum if I'd done that 15 minutes or that 10 minutes or that 5 minutes, whatever I could get. And I remember when the kids were a bit smaller, them even sitting on the end of the bed watching Paw Patrol while I'm doing a practice. It's not perfect calm. It's not serenity. But sometimes as mums, we just need to carve out those times, and it might not be perfect. I'd love to say that my kids didn't watch lots of screen time, but sometimes it's more important that they do that and I take that time for myself than for them to watch that, that 15 minutes of TV.
yeah, absolutely. It's about safeguarding your sanity and well-being, isn't it? And I've learnt that very much over my mothering journey, that self-care was a reactive thing when I got ill or when I was burning out. And I really struggled to make it proactive because I'd got these unrealistic perfectionist tendencies around it, that, I can only meditate if I've got complete quietness in the house. And of course, with kids around, you don't. So there was never a time where it was the perfect time to do it. And I would only go, I'll only take time for me when there's time. Well, there's never going to be time. So yeah, it was embracing doing it imperfectly and making it a kind of a proactive rather than a reactive, which really brings us on to the amazing app that you then developed. So you're the proud founder of the Nourish app. Could you share what this is and how this came about and what it does for us mums?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, great segue onto that. So as I've kind of highlighted, I think on my own journey with self-care, as a time poor, busy mum, I felt very frustrated by the lack of easily accessible, practical resources that were tailored to the emotions and challenges that we face as mums. And, I did use other types of, as I said, I went on this group CBT course that wasn't tailored to mothers. And, I did try other apps, which were great, but I felt frustrated that they weren't tailored to the motherhood experience. And really, because of all those things that you mentioned about finding the time and carving things out, and you don't necessarily have time to go on an 8-week course. I was at a luxury time in my life where I'd made that time and headspace, but we just don't have that time. Making time to go to a yoga class is very difficult. We are just very time poor. So I wanted, I really needed something that I could reach for at my fingertips anytime, anywhere. And also somewhere that I felt held and understood, and kind of validated in the feelings that I was experiencing. And I think also somewhere where I had choice, depending on my needs and preferences in different moments, because sometimes we've got more energy than others, or, sometimes we want to move and sometimes we want to sit and sometimes we want to relax, or sleep. I think, the other thing is that, and also that everybody's self-care is different, preferences are different, and they change over time as well. And then also something that was easily affordable. I had made this transition from, corporate making lots of money to actually being completely unpaid. And, it was great to have that investment initially to spend on a coach and things like that. But actually, in reality, a lot of us are, having made that kind of transition temporarily to working for myself, not having a lot of money to spend either. So something that was really easily affordable. And really that's why I created the Nourish app, which is, jam-packed full of moments of calm. It's a broad library of practical and bite-sized, relevant and relatable self-care tools to really help soothe our frazzled nerves and help us relax and restore and reboot, and ultimately be kinder to ourselves as well. And I think self-care, as you say, is so hard, and making time for that is so hard. And that's something that I really recognise. And that's why, with the app, we just wanted to make it easy and accessible, giving you that broad toolkit at your fingertips that you can turn to depending on your needs and preferences in different moments to really, as you say, not recognizing that you might not have 30 minutes, you might only have 2 minutes, and that doesn't matter. But then you've got something that you can reach for that is only 2 minutes. And if we always think that we've got to carve out 30 minutes or 20 minutes, then we just will never do it. But if we've got things that we can turn to that are 2 minutes or 5 minutes, or if we've got 20 minutes, then we can turn to those. So really, creating something that is at your fingertips, that, helps you make time for you.
So am I right in saying that on the app you've got psychologists, you've got yoga practitioners, you've got kind of a wealth of specialists that specialise in supporting women, in particular mums and busy mums, that you can pick and choose what's going to support you in that given moment?
Yes, exactly. And all the content is created by a team of wellbeing professionals who are all mums who get it. So we really wanted to give this sense of a support team in your pocket. So rather than just faceless content, it's mums who understand the struggles. But as you say, it's multidisciplinary. So there's, yoga poses, there's mindfulness meditations, from a number of different styles and different lengths. There's some nutrition tips, there's breathing exercises. There's yoga Nidra, which is really popular. I think that's something that only came to in my psyche, actually during the creation of the app. We did some a crowdfunding campaign, and back in 2018, and a yoga Nidra teacher approached me, Sara Johnson, and she said, the app sounds fantastic. Have you heard, have you got any yoga Nidra on there? And I'd never practiced yoga Nidra at all before. So, and we got talking, and she contributes to the app. And that is, an amazing practice for really helping us, relax and restore. And I think, in a way it doesn't have the same pressures as, say, mindfulness, because it's not necessarily about training the mind. It's just helping us relax and restore our body and our mind. And it's, it's very powerful. So yeah, we've got that on there as well.
It's interesting you talk about yoga Nidra, because after my first child, I got adrenal fatigue, and part of my recovery was using yoga Nidra. And it was this, and I read a brilliant book called Daring to Rest, which is written by an American yoga Nidra teacher. And it really struck me, because it was, I found it so difficult to rest, like you, very busy mind, very on the go. There's always something to be doing. And that actually having something that I was doing. So actually I was doing a yoga Nidra, so it gave me a purpose. But actually the purpose of yoga Nidra is just to rest. Was really so restorative, and was part of kind of my recovery journey.
Yeah, and I think those that accept yoga Nidra into their life is it is really powerful, and it part of it is that obviously the first step is that permission to take that time to rest, and then having, I think for us who are so busy and so used to doing and being on the whole time, having apologies, the kids are running through that.
We are living the working mum dream. So I love that this is just a reality. So please don't apologise.
Yeah, so it's but then having those tools to support you and guide you, I think, are critical to empower you to take that rest.
Yes. So thank you for creating this app. And I think the work that must have gone into that behind the scenes was phenomenal, but you've created something incredibly powerful. So if there's just one thing that you hope a working mum who's listening to this and what we're saying, if there was just one thing that you hope a working mum who's listening to this conversation and listening to what you're saying, if they were to take one thing from this, what would you want that to be?
It's so hard to choose one thing. So I'm going to choose two things. I'm sorry.
Go for it. I love it. Take what you need.
So I think there's one thing which is, we cannot do it all. and let go of that pressure of perfection and that belief that we can do it all. So where can you find areas in your life to ask for help or get further support or, cut out of your life? And then the second one is just give yourself permission to pause and to rest and to nourish your mind and body and soul, because not only will you find more balance and joy when you do, but your kids will reap the rewards.
Oh, that's so powerful. Incredibly powerful. That's given me like tingles. So how can people find out more about you and the Nourish app? Where would you point people to?
So you can find out more about the Nourish app on the website, which is www.thenourishapp.com, or you can search directly on the App Store, Apple's App Store or Google Play Store, and follow us on Instagram, for regular motivation and tips around your self-care as well, which is at the Nourish app.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Sara. You've been an amazing guest, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.